to introduce Jeff Tracy with Valley Center, and he will introduce his students. But they are here today to talk about a project in 2012 where they created an experiment for the Student Spaceflight Experiments program. And their project was selected to travel up to the International Space Station, which in itself is quite an achievement. So without any further ado, I'm going to let Jeff introduce his team, and we'll let the guys here tell us about the project. So thank you.
All right, hello. The students here that we're presenting are mostly juniors this year at Valley Center High School. They were sophomores at school when they started the project. Actually, all of you guys are juniors. The one of our students was not able to accompany us today, so he's not on the panel. We have Wesley Crow. We have Cole Hammer. And we have Logan Burke. And we have Sam Sheehan. So we're going to show you, start off with a little bit of a video. When this project got started, we were looking for something within the school to really get the students involved in true science, in the true exploration, answering the question, proposing an explanation, designing an experiment, carrying out that experiment. And so that was what it was, and we stumbled across this truthfully just in a search for a project to work on. And one of the math teachers at the high school was able to, came across this, and we were able to apply to get into this program. And we got all the application work done, and once we finally got approved, we didn't let the students know what we were doing, and then all of a sudden we kind of unveiled this project to them. And so I started out when I unveiled the project, I showed this video in class, and they were all standing there going, what does this have to do with biology? But it was an inspirational video, and it kind of stuck in their minds, and they decided if they were building a presentation, they'd like to share this video with you to start out the presentation. got involved in it. These gentlemen are going to kind of share with you their project, how it evolved over time, what final project they actually sent into space, and then the final results of their experiment. So you guys can take it.
So our story starts, kind of where he left off. And my friend here, Wesley Crow, and I, we were sitting in biology class watching the video that you guys all just saw. And of course, wondering why we were watching this video in biology. And then afterwards, Mr. Tracy explains to us that all of us students sitting in that classroom were going to have a chance to send something to the ISS. And Wesley and I look at each other and we're like, we have to do this. This sounds amazing. And so we got all our friends together, started looking for projects, and of course these projects have to fit in a very small tube, so there's a lot of restraints. And so one of the things we started out looking at was using muscle tissue and testing it with steroids in space and seeing how it, in microgravity, would be affected differently than it is here. And unfortunately, we couldn't use actual human muscle tissue in space, so we kind of decided to scrap that project altogether, which the problem with that being is we were running out of time and we really needed to find something. So we started looking into cancer cell research and then couldn't find anything with that. And at one point in time, we ended up looking at putting small frogs in tubes, which makes no sense. But I mean, as high schoolers do, we finally came up with something just before the due date, and that was our project, which is will bacteria be less susceptible to antibiotics after it's been grown under the influence of microgravity. And our hypothesis was that the effects would make the bacteria more resistant. So that was kind of how our project was formed.
All right, so as Cole stated, we found out what our project was going to be, and we were going to deal with bacteria. But the question was, how are we going to test? How are we going to tell whether microgravity affected the growth of bacteria and the growth of bacteria on Earth? And so throughout the project, we had a lot of different changes. We first started by using a bacteria called Staphylococcus intermedius, and we thought it was fine. We don't know anything about microbiology, and we send in our proposal, and the officials at SSEP said, "No, you can't use this. It's too harmful to be in the space station." So we had to scratch that and find a new bacteria. And so we came across one called Staphylococcus epidermidis, which is just it's a skin bacteria, and so it's not too harmful. Also, we learned that we needed to use a freeze-dried bacteria so that the bacteria it would not start growing until it was activated in the International Space Station, so when it's freeze-dried. We also discovered that instead of using one antibiotic to test on the bacteria, we used multiple antibiotics, so we had different results to go off of. And a big learning curve for us was when we were talking to the officials at SSEP about how we would do the experiment. In our proposal, we wrote that in one end of the FME we would have broth. We wrote it would have agar, and then the other one would have bacteria. And they would mix it in the International Space Station. But the problem is, you don't use agar to grow with broth. The agar is used to plate and put the bacteria on. And so these are all new things for us that we had to learn. Had no idea the difference between agar and broth. And so these are all things that we had to learn throughout our process. And lastly, our project changed a lot because from our beginning, we were on a mission, and it had this as the FME, and inside of it, it has a glass tube that we would load.
You might explain your acronym. What does that mean?
An FME, okay. An FME is pretty much just this tube. We didn't have
Fluid mixture.
yeah, fluid mixture enclosure. Is what it is. And so in this one, inside here we would have broth, and inside here we would have the bacteria. And when it was in the space station, the astronauts would crack the tube and mix the broth and the bacteria so it would start growing. Well, later on, our project changed from being this to being this, to where there's a clamp that separates it, and they just unclamp it and mix the two different ingredients. So throughout this whole experience, this is really just a big, big learning experience for us, and we really enjoyed it. We had to learn how to prepare presentations and write papers and all that.
Well, see, we're not, like scientists or anything like that, so we had no idea to plate stuff or do any of this, so we had to learn. One big thing is we had to do aseptic techniques, and aseptic is it can't be contaminated, so everything had to be sterile. So we learned how to use a UV cabinet, so we sterilized everything, our FME, our tubes, really everything that we were going to use. It was all new to us. So pretty much we did a bunch of trial runs, loading the FMEs, practicing using the FMEs. We took like syringes. We would like practice just having sterile stuff and not getting any of it contaminated. And this picture here, as you can see on the PowerPoint, it's a picture of Sammy here loading or having a ground test trial run of loading some broth into the FME. So basically, it's just super new to us. Like, I mean, we're 15, 16 years old and don't know anything about how to do this. So it's pretty much our preparation in the process. Writing a lot of papers. And oh yeah, we also we had to learn. Well, in the process of sterilizing all this stuff, we realized that it's super hard to get, like, let's see, our hands not touching any of the sterile stuff, because if we touched it, it's not sterile. So, I mean, it's really hard to not get anything contaminated. So we used funnels. We tried funnels a couple times. Eventually it worked, and syringes worked. Our swabbing techniques were new to us as well. So it's pretty much how we had to